Alright guys, how are y'all doing today? So, it's finally here. We're going to be reinstalling the Homelab and setting everything back up again. And I'm going to show you guys how to do Proxmox. So, what is Proxmox, you might be wondering. If you're familiar with Microsoft's Hyper-V or with VMware's vFusion suite, vSphere, VMware Fusion, whatever they call it nowadays, that's basically what it is it's a server that you use to host virtual machines that then, so you basically just have one gigantic server that has a bunch of virtual servers within it. So very useful for specific services. You can have one virtual machine that just does your VPN connections, one that does all your file sharing, so on and so forth. All right, so now that we're booted up into the installer, you want to make sure that you read the EULA very, very thoroughly before you do anything with it. Down here at the bottom, it's going to say target hard disk. You want to make sure that you do not install Proxmox directly onto any of the drives you want to have in any of your arrays. What I do is I have a dedicated M.2, like 250 gig SSD that I'm going to install to. There are more advanced options if you want it. You can change the format, you can specify the size, you can do whatever else you need to do. I don't need to change any of that for my setup. Yours may vary. And the next thing it's going to do is it's going to have you set up the time and your keyboard layout. We are in the New York time zone, which is EST. So it's very important to note that the password that you're setting up here is for the root user. So you want to, once you're booted in, you can set up a new user and use that account rather than using root. Yeah, for setup, you will have to use root at least a little bit. Also enter a valid email in here because Proxmox can email you and give you notices of when backups fail and like all that kind of stuff. So we're going to set up our host name, designdocs.net. Now, this is a little bit misleading because it's got the /24, so it's like trying to tell you that you're just kind of setting a DHCP range. You're not. You're actually setting the IP that you want it to have. So make sure that this is accurate to your setup. Okay, next, and install. Cool. Now, this will take a few minutes, so while this is installing on your machine, go make some coffee. By the time you come back, it'll probably be done. All right, and it looks like our install finished. It automatically reboots. And now when it comes back up, it should be accessible on the web interface. It will tell you the IP. However, we're not going to access it just yet. The first thing that we need to do is you always want to do updates the first time you install a Linux system. And in order to do that, they ship with a repository that's for the paid-for version by default. Obviously, we cannot use that if we are using the free version, so we have to disable that and then enable the free repository, and then we can apply updates. It's probably going to do a kernel update and a bunch of other stuff too, so we want to get all that out of the way first before we start mucking with anything. So we are up. First thing we're going to do is we're going to log in as our root user. Cool, and we are in. So, like I had said, the first thing we want to do is we want to edit the repositories. So the first thing we need to do is we need to disable the, what do they call it, the enterprise repository. So there's actually two different things that we need to edit, just, for them to be annoying. So the first thing that we're going to edit is we're going to go to nano/etc/ let's see, which one is the enterprise repository in? Is /etc/apt/sources.list.d/pve enterprise.list. And see, this one only has the one line. So I comment that boy out, and we're going to write there, and we are going to save. So now what we can also do is edit the other list to add the free repository. So this time we're going to nano etc/apt/sources.list. That's going to give us the other three repositories that are active. I like to add it right here in the middle because that's the way the wiki does it. And we do, what is it? No subscription? Yeah, no subscription. So you do deb http://download.proxmox.com, if I could type, Jesus, .com/dbn/pve, and you're going to do a space, bullseye, pve-no-subscription. We're going to write that out. And we should be good to update now. So just because I'm paranoid, because my DNS setup's a little weird, I'm going to ping google.com just to make sure that I can actually reach out on the internet. I can't wait for this to not work. Ooh, look at that. It's not working. Either that or it's just not doing anything. That's weird. God, I hate Ethernet cables. The tab on my Ethernet cable pulled out ever so slightly. Or it broke, so the cable pulled out ever so slightly. Yeah, there we are. Alright, so now that we've got all that done, now we can actually do the update. So we're going to do apt update and apt upgrade. So this is going to download all of the latest packages that it can get. It's going to ask us if we want to install these upgrades. I'm going to tell it yes. It is definitely doing a kernel upgrade. Looks like dash 0.107, so yeah, quite a few upgrades available there. I think this ships with like 0.34 or something like that, so yeah. To be fair, this ISO is like a year old, so this is another thing that's going to take some time, so feel free to go make yourself a second cup of coffee, or a sandwich, or whatever else you need to do. Whew, it took a while. All right. So what I'm going to do here is normally in this case you would do a reboot command to reboot the server and get back up and running. I'm actually going to do a power off because I no longer require the GPU in this system, and we can do everything via the web interface or SSH. So I'm going to go take the GPU out because it's loud and it's annoying. Okay, and just like that, now our system is accessible at the IP address specified earlier. Add port 8006 to the end of it, pull you right up to the login page. Once you log in, system will complain, no valid subscription, whatever, we know that. So, we have no VMs here. We have basically nothing, which is about what we expected, right? So what we want to do first is kind of get familiar with how the interface here works. So the idea of Proxmox is you kind of want to have multiple nodes that are running your VMs. It works totally fine with one, but it's designed for multiple. So you've got your data center, which is all of your nodes, and then it breaks down each individual node and all of the resources that that individual node has. So you can see individual storage that that node has, VMs, so on and so forth. This is useful so that way the idea of high availability. So if there is a problem with one of your nodes, all of your VMs can vMotion to another node and start right back up and not have any downtime. You can do some kind of fun things where like this is the node that does all the infrastructure stuff. This is the node stuff that does all the storage stuff. And you can get kind of fun and creative with it. Most of the use cases will be high availability. We're not going to get into that right now, mostly just because I don't have another server to test high availability on. Doesn't really matter. The big thing that we'll want to do first is to get our template VM up and running. Actually, that's a lie. The first thing we're going to want to do is to create our RAID array because we need to have somewhere to store this data. So the easiest way to do that, I've been using ZFS. I really like ZFS. It's got a lot of nice, cool features. And is fairly resilient to issues, as I've experienced. So the only downside is that it kind of uses a lot of RAM for caching. So if you're RAM limited, you might want to just do a normal pool of disks. If you have a hardware SATA controller that supports RAID, do that. There's a ton of ways to do it, but this is the way that I'm going to be doing it. So the way that I like to set these up is I do it all via command line. So you want to go ahead and SSH into your server. You're going to want to just use the root account for now until you can create the user account and all that good stuff. It's just easier to log into root. So the main thing that we need to do is we need to destroy the old zpool. So what we want to do here is we want to zpool import. It's going to list both, but neither of them are actually going to import because they were last used on a different system. But it gives us our identifiers. So we now know our pool ID. So we're going to zpool and destroy RAID Mark III. Cannot open no such pool. That's not true. Maybe I need to import it first. So zpool import -f RAID Mark III. This takes a minute or two. There it goes. Now I can destroy that pool. So now when I do this, it should only show the one pool, which it does. Cool. All right, so now we can actually create our new pool. So we need to know what all of our devices are. So we're going to fdisk-l grep disk. So we want to do one with SDA, SDB, SDC, SDE, SDF, SDG, SDG should be the last one, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is correct. Here, that means that we're going to do zpool create -f -o. I'm gonna do a RAID Z1, which is a pool with one redundant disk, meaning that I can lose one disk and still rebuild the entire array. The only reason I'm doing that instead of normally I would recommend doing a RAID Z pool 2, which is 2 redundant disks. The only problem with that is that I only have 6 disks and they're 4 terabytes of pop. So if I do that, I'm losing a third of my entire capacity. So it's like, I'd rather have a little bit more capacity and a little bit less redundancy. The odds of me losing 2 drives in a row and losing all of my data will be very low. And to be honest with you, since this is not a production server, this is just like for my own home services. If I do lose a drive and I need to order another one, I can just power down the server. Like, I don't have to use it until I get the new drive in and rebuild the array. So it's not the end of the world. Okay, so then we're going to do a shift. Go to 12. We're going to name our pool, which is going to be RAID Mark IV. We are doing a RAID Z1, and we are doing it with dev SDA, dev SDF. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's only 5 drives, dev SDG. There we go. And that should be all we need to do, except that I made a typo. There we go. So this is going to automatically create our array. Awesome. So now if I do zpool status, there we are, RAID Mark IV online. Cool. So while we're at it, we're going to go ahead and import big disks mark, what was it, V1 or whatever? Yeah, -f. Okay, so now we've got both pools available to our system, which is fantastic. So there is some fun things that you can do with emails and such for zpool issues. I'm not going to bother with that. If you want to do that, you can read it up on the wiki. It's really cool. You can also limit your memory usage with ZFS. On some of your more memory constrained systems, this is probably a good idea. On this case, I've got 96 gigs of RAM and not going to be a whole lot of read-write activity on it. It's mostly going to be reads. The write activity is going to be really what uses the RAM, and it's not super like the formula is something like if you've got like 8 terabytes of available storage, then you want to use about 10 gigabytes of memory. So that would mean that I would be wanting to dedicate about 50% of my RAM just to ZFS. But like I'm kind of okay with that because like a lot of my other VMs aren't that RAM heavy. If I start adding more VMs and I need more RAM, I'm totally okay with limiting the performance. But as it is right now, I'm kind of going to be sitting at exactly the right amount anyway without having to do any config changes. So we're gonna not worry about that. You also kind of want to make sure like your swap space and other weird things are set up on different drives and there's cache that you can set up and all that. We ain't doing any of that, mostly because I have to buy an SSD for that, and I spent that money on buying an SSD for my stream PC. So we'll revisit that at another time. Again, I'm not doing a whole lot of high frequency read writes. Like Plex will read from it, and then if I'm pulling a random file from the archive, I'll read from that. It'll be like a few gigs. That's it. The most intense will be offloading completed project archives to the array, and that'll be like a once a week kind of thing for like my YouTube projects. That'll be 100 gigs, and then like I won't do anything else on the array for like a few days, so it will have time to do its caching and get everything through. So anyway, so that is how we create the pools. Now is going to be when we start to create our VMs and we want to actually use the ZFS data on our system. So in order to do that, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to edit your configs for storage definitions. You can do this in the interface, but I find it easier to just manually edit the config file personally. So storage.cfg. So this should be pretty empty because we have a basically brand new setup, right? So what we're going to do here is we want to set this up so that way there is multiple directories here, because we're going to have to import some stuff from the 8 terabyte drive. So what we're going to do, first off, what we're going to do is we're going to do ZFS pool RAID Mark IV. So under that, we're going to put pool RAID Mark IV. And then I think I just do that. Content, we're going to do root directory, images, backup, ISO, I think is the way that I want to do that. Oh, I also want to add data. I want my ZFS pool to have access to everything. And then sparse one. Write that out. Now if we go back to the web interface, assuming that I didn't mess it up. So it's here, the configuration's there, but status is unknown, so I think I may have messed something up. Dataset does not exist. Okay, yeah. I think I may have gotten my notes backwards, so if I do that... Yeah, there we go. I got my notes backwards. I was looking at something else. So, okay. So what I did to fix it was I just removed the VM subdirectory. I was getting my ZFS pool setups messed up with data sets, so don't worry about it. But basically, your pool has to match the name of the pool, and the mount point has to match the exact name of the mount point. No subdirectories, and it does work. It doesn't seem to let me put things like ISOs and such in there, so I will actually have to create another directory. So what I will do is I will do directory. What are we gonna call this one? RAID Mark IV data. And so this one is going to be path. I don't know off the top of my head what the data flag does, but I'm going to keep it anyway, just in case. And then we're going to prune backups, keep all set to 1 because I don't want it to delete anything. And we're going to share to 0 because it is not shared over the network. Then we're going to do the same thing for my 8 terabyte drive. So we do path. Actually, what is that path? That is big disks -v1. Okay, so big disks v1. Content is going to be the same, so images. And then we're going to add the other ZFS pool as well. And that should be all we need to do as far as our storage definitions. So if we click back over here, so there we go. So there we go. We've got all of our data sets now. So we've got big disks. Notice how it's already got some storage used because it is not a clean drive. RAID Mark IV data does not have anything used on it. So this is still only giving me access to, it's not giving me, like this is supposed to, like how this has ISO images and backups. I don't have those tabs over here. So I think I may have messed up my config again, which is, not surprising. Yeah, I'm not sure what issue I'm running into. I'm not sure what the problem here is because I just edited the local definition, and now I actually no longer have a local definition in my config, and it's still there, and it also updated the content flags, but it's not changing the path. So like something weird is going on. I'm not really sure what it is at this time. It's not that big of a deal. We will figure it out later. It worked for the Z pools, and that's the important stuff. So we'll figure out the others. So now that we have our base here, and we have our storage pools, we are ready to actually start creating VMs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how I create my template VMs, because there's 2 ways that you can create a template. There is an actual template functionality within Proxmox that you can use, or you can clone existing virtual machines. I prefer to do the manual clone because it seems to me like I couldn't figure out how to do this. I could be entirely wrong, but it seems to me that once you create your template, it no longer lets you boot it. So I couldn't boot it to add, like maybe, let's say like in 6 months I come up with a new feature that I want all of the VMs in my fleet to have, like I have a new monitor tool, or I do a fleet-wide password change or something like that. I couldn't figure out how to boot the template to do that and then convert it back to a template afterwards. So what I do is I just clone VMs. Templates have some advantages to where you can have your base image, and then any changes that you make are basically just deltas based off the template image. So it can theoretically use way less hard drive space. And then there's some cool resource sharing stuff that you can do there. But the fact that I couldn't boot it again to make any changes kind of killed its utility for me. So I'd rather have the extra hard drive space being used. And realistically, because I'm using ZFS has deduplication built into it on a software level. So even though I have two templates that are completely identical, on the back end, on the ZFS end, it will just have one set of that data saved to my array, and I'll be saving data that way. So at the end of the day, it's like, nah, I'm not really losing anything. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to upload an ISO of whatever software you want to install to Proxmox. You can do this one of two ways. If you have the ISO local, you can hit the upload button, send it over that way, or you can download from URL. I'm just going to download it from URL because I don't believe like it's on my USB, and that will kind of suck to copy it off that. It'll only be at 5 megabytes per second. So what we're going to do is we're going to experiment with using Rocky Linux as my new base ISO. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do a full DVD. I probably could get away with just doing a minimal and then by hand installing the stuff that I want, but I don't really want to do that. That seems like not fun. So what you want to do is you get to the download, you right click the link, copy link, switch back over to Proxmox, download from URL. Enter the URL, file name. I like to do the same file name that would be downloaded otherwise. So I just copy this tail end right there, do that, and hit download. And it will give you a live printout as it's doing it, as well as a tasks log for what's going on. So this will take a few minutes, so I'm just going to kind of let it sit here and do its thing, and we will check back whenever it's done. All right, so our ISO has now downloaded and we can begin the installation. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on our node. We're going to hit create VM and we're going to name it. So if you have more than one node up here at the top, you'll be able to specify the node that you want it to go to, change the resource portal, all that good stuff. Since this is going to be our template, I like to do higher IVM IDs. These aren't really super necessary, it's a visual thing for identification purposes. I like to do 999 as my template. So we're going to do Rocky 9.1 temp, and then I put the date that I created it. So it will be 04/30/23. And we're going to choose the disks, change the storage. Our ISO is there, Linux. So it knows that you're probably going to do this. So these are just defaults. You can change it if you need to. Most of the time you're not going to need to. Hit next. Graphics card, we're going to leave at standard VGA because we are going to go CLI only, so having a desktop manager does not matter. You want to make sure that your machine is set to Q35, just so that way it uses the more modern OVMF. For our EFI storage, you can pick where you want to store it. I typically will just keep that with where I'm also storing the disk image. So that'll go right on RAID Mark IV. Disks, we're going to add a disk. You can select the different kind of file formats that you want. SCSI is a good kind of default to just use for everything. If you know what you're doing and you're doing more higher end applications, you can do VirtIO blocks. It's a little bit out of scope for this tutorial, and also kind of frankly, the scale at which you and I are going to be using this in a Homelab, probably not super necessary. Disk size, set it to anything you want. I like to set mine to 50. Cache, leave that as the default. Discard, leave that unchecked. IO thread, leave that checked. If you want, you can set limits for bandwidth for read and writes. So that way you can kind of rate limit your storage network. Useful for some applications, but again, for what I'm using it for, it's not really relevant. And then we're going to set the amount of CPUs. So, typically what I do is I do a gig of RAM, or less if I can get away with it. and 1 vCPU core per Linux VM. There are some exceptions to that. If you're running more intense software, obviously, like if you're running a Plex server, I gave it way more CPU cores for transcoding, as well as I think 4 gigs of RAM. But it really just depends on what you're doing. For most machines where they're idle most of the time, and like you just kind of log in and do specific things, like a VM server, or like if you do an Ansible server, most of the time they don't really need a whole lot of RAM and CPU. I will say that modern Ubuntu server, if you try to boot the installer with less than a gig of RAM, it will kernel panic and freak out. However, you can do the initial install and then bump it down to 768, and that will boot. So I don't know. I really like to see what the minimum I can get Rocky Linux to go to is. So we're going to start with 768 megabytes. I have a feeling that's more of a kernel issue than a Ubuntu issue, although Ubuntu also adds like their cloud init stuff and has all the snap stuff. So it's very possible it could just be their fault. But we'll see. If you don't want to have a networking device, you can just check the box. Most of the time you're going to want to. One of the cool things about Proxmox is that it comes set up with a bridge already set up. So you don't have to do anything fancy. You just create it and it will bridge it to your local network, and it will have an IP range that's on the same IP range as the rest of your network. Super cool. You can also manually specify MAC addresses if you want. I leave them automated, and you can kind of specify your network model. Again, that's a little bit out of scope for what we're going to be doing here. And finally, you kind of get a summary view and overview of everything that we've entered, just so you can double check everything, make sure it's all right, which it is. So we're going to hit finish. And it's going to go through and it's going to create our config file, create our disks and everything. And we are still in the middle of being created. That's okay. It can take a second or two. And there we go. So now we are at status stopped. High availability state is none because we don't have any high availability. It'll tell you the node that it's currently running on, and you can see live stats. You will need to configure the QEMU guest agent. I believe on Linux it's just kind of configured out of the box. We might need to install something. I don't remember off the top of my head. But we'll find out before too much longer. So, out of the box, this is ready to go. Basically, all you're going to need to do at this point is hit start. And then if you click over to the console screen, it will give you a video feed. That would be what you would see if you had a physical GPU plugged in. So you click into it to get control, and then you can use your keyboard. So I'm going to hit install Rocky Linux. And get allocate init RD. Okay. Yeah, kernel panicked. Okay. So, well, that's unfortunate. So we will shut it down. See if it'll listen to a shutdown. We might need to do a force. It's not going to listen to a shutdown, so we're going to hard stop, which that may not go through either because of the shutdown, so we might need to wait a few seconds for that to time out. Proxmox is a little weird with its startup and shutdown commands. I don't typically use them unless there's like an emergency. Okay, so the hard stop command failed because it couldn't, it couldn't lock a file. QEMU server, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Because this is running. So we're gonna wait for that to time out and do its thing, and then we can do the hard shutdown. Oh boy. Okay, let's go back to hardware, edit, 1024, start. Wow, this won't even boot with a gig. That's a problem. Okay, well, unfortunately, I did a whole bunch of reading about the RAM requirements, and that kind of stumbled me into a bug report on Red Hat's Bugzilla that I'm actually really glad that I found. So even if I do somehow manage to get it booting with 1 gig of RAM or less, DNF update will just like crash and like freak out things. So, and like this has been posted in as recently as like 2 weeks ago. So like, this is an ongoing thing, and I don't like the ability of not being able to upgrade my servers. So unfortunately, I'm going to just kind of put a pause on using a Fedora-based or a Red Hat related distro, and we're just going to stick with Ubuntu server for the Homelab, which is unfortunate, but is what it is. Maybe some point in the near future, they will figure out that bug, and then we can go back to testing out Fedora or Rocky Linux, but as it is right now, it's going to require too much more RAM that I don't really want to give it. So, oh well. I'm just downloading the ISO right now, and once this is finished, we will I'll set back up the VM, and we will pick right back up at the installer. All right, so we are back. Just for the purposes of the installing everything, I beefed this thing way up. So we've got 8 vCPUs and 8 gigs of RAM. Won't really affect anything, and it's going to get pulled back down whenever we're done with the actual installer. I just wanted to give the installer the most oomph available to make sure that this happen as quickly as possible. So whenever you boot the Ubuntu installer, it will always check for updates for the new installer. So it's always a good idea to download that, unless you run into some weird bugs, in which case don't. But that's a boy, I updated and things got weird, and let me try it again without updating kind of situation. Otherwise, it's always update. So we'll just let this do its thing. It will black screen, and then it will reload. Usually doesn't take very long. So there we go. So we're already done with the update. So our layout, English US, variant English US, so we're good there. Let me pop this out so it's a little bit bigger for you guys. Now we're gonna hit done. For this one, I previously did this as Ubuntu server. However, I think this time around, I'm gonna do it as Ubuntu server minimized. I don't know where that accent's coming from. The idea is that Ubuntu Server Minimized has a very core subset of all the features, and you have to add back all the stuff that you might need. I'm going to try to do that to see if it will reduce my RAM requirements, just because of the fact that RAM is not something that I have an abundant amount of. I mean, I've got 96 gigs, which sounds like a lot. When you think about it in the grand scheme of things, that means that I can only have 90 VMs that are 1 gigabyte RAM apiece, and that's if I don't use ZFS. So now that I'm using ZFS, that number halves. So I can have 45 VMs. And then if I ever do anything extra, like if I do Plex, well, that requires 2 gigs. Or if I do Minecraft, oh, well, that's Java. That's going to require 4 on the low end. Ideally, I'd like to throw 8 at it. So you see my problem here. So you want to try to keep your footprint as minimal as possible. We also don't really need to do a whole lot of searching for third-party drivers, just because of the fact that most of everything that we're doing is going to be Red Hat drivers that are already in the kernel, and we don't have any specialized hardware that's going into any of these. So what I like to do here is I like to set a static IP. So for my subnet, we're going to do 192.168.1. Let's see. What IP do I normally use? So what I do is that I have an IP that's assigned specifically for my template. So that way, every time I boot it, I know exactly where it is on my network. Give me 1 second while I log in my router and I look at my setup here. I'm pretty sure it's something super high, like 250 or something like that. Template v2 is actually, oh, I did a lower IP on that one. Okay. That one may, okay, what's the original template? It doesn't seem to have one, so that's okay. Yeah, okay, I see my logic here. So here's what we're going to do. So we're going to do 192.168.1.9/24. Helps if I'm tabbed into the right window. Actually, what I'm going to do real quick, in my router, I'm going to edit the MAC address. So now we can come back to here. There are some train of thoughts for how you should be setting up your static IPs, whether you should do them on the device themselves or if you do it on the router. I like doing it on the router because that's a little bit easier to automate. It's a little bit easier of an interface. I don't have to, like, I can bootstrap it easier and set static IPs if I do it directly on the servers. But if there's ever a problem on the server and, like, I accidentally, like, let's say that I restore an old version and then I want to boot it too, the way that the cloning works is it changes the MAC address, which means that whenever it comes up, it's going to have a different IP automatically because of the way that I'm setting my static routes. If I set the static routes, or I'm sorry, the static IPs on the servers, they'll come up with the same IP, and you have to, like, disconnect the network adapter in one or turn the other one off, and it's kind of a headache. I like doing it this way. You feel free to do it your way, and feel free to tell me in the comments below about how retarded I am for doing it this way. And yeah, we look good. Cool. So we're going to save that. I'm just going to apply it. 192.168.1.9. Cool. So I can hit done. We do not use a proxy. Mirror address. Okay, it worked. Thank you. So what you can do is you can manually configure your storage layout. This is probably useful and something that you should be doing because you can break out specific things into their own drives. Like, for example, you can have your log, your /var/log directory as its own disk. Super useful for not only extra storage, but also makes maintenance easier and a bunch of other things. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to kind of let LVM do its thing. Actually, I don't know. Custom storage layout. I want to try this. Because, like, I know a while ago it was, like, kind of bugged and, like, did things, like, in a really weird way. Which is why I didn't bother with it. And I just manually fixed it after the fact. But, let's try it. So, we're going to do available devices. How big should this be? How big should my log disk be? Log disks don't really need to be that big. So what we can do is we can specify 45.0 G for our slash. And then we're going to go here, add GPT partition. And we're going to add 2 gig for var log. And then I guess we will, I really don't think I need a whole lot for boot, like 512 megs. And then I got an extra 1.44 gigs. What else can I put here? Oh, that's a little sloppy, James. I could have done that a little bit better. I guess this means that I could probably add more to var log. Can I not? Okay, I can delete. Add GPT partition. Right, okay, so I can just dedicate 3.448 gigs directly to log disk. That's a lot, and I will probably never have to worry about that ever again on any of my servers. So that will be lovely. We'll do other var log. Perfect. So let's see if this works, because I can't wait for it to be broken and just not actually do what I told it to do. I'm really excited for that. Continue. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to, typically what I've done previously is I've created like an admin account, but it just kind of increased my workflow for an account that I just never used because I just set up my JRoll account to be exactly the same thing as the admin account and just use that for everything. So it's just kind of something extra. So server's name, this is going to be template. Ubuntu 2204. I highly recommend creating a very complicated password and then using SSH keys to log in and disabling password login, but that is going to be totally your call. Install OpenSSH. It would be kind of nice to import SSH keys, but whatever. So if you're not importing by default, you have to enable password authentication over SSH. That's fine. Like, set it all up, install your SSH keys, and then turn off password authentication. All right, so now we can pick some stuff that we might want. It might be kind of nice to have Docker installed on my template, but I'm not going to do that, and I'd rather just install Docker on the specific VMs that actually need it. So I don't think I need anything else here. PowerShell. So, yep. Okay. Done. So it is going to just kind of do its thing. And hopefully when it comes up, it actually like mounts my drives correctly and works. And we'll be good to go. All right. So our install finally finished. So we're going to go down to reboot now. And we are just going to kind of keep our fingers crossed and hope that it works. It should just work without me having to unmount the image. All right, so we are now booted and everything here should be good. We can now SSH in. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is actually just close out of that. And you're going to want to set up an SSH session on your actual computer. The main reason for that is just so that way it will be a little bit easier to handle. The TTOI console like works, but like you can't copy and paste into it, and it's kind of slow to refresh and kind of slow to type in. And it's more for emergency maintenance, not really so much for actively doing things. Generally, what I would recommend doing first is installing your SSH keys, like I said. However, for the sake of this video, I'm not going to bother with that. Woohoo! We are logged in. All right, so let's check our layouts here. Let's make sure everything actually worked correctly. That doesn't seem right, but whatever. Yeah, we seem okay. All right, cool. Fantastic. This actually worked right out of the box. So what is the first thing you do when you get a system up and running? That's right, apt update and apt upgrade. Pretty up to date. Doesn't look like a whole lot of anything's going on, so not too worried about it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to need to go through and kind of figure out what packages we want to have in our base image and just kind of make sure everything there is up and running and we'll figure it out from there. So the cool thing here is that because most of what I did in the startup process, I don't have to go back and do a lot of the changes that I was going to do anyway. So like where I updated my DNS server, I had to kind of go back in and edit the network config for my other VMs and make all those changes. Don't have to do that because new setup. So there's really not a whole lot that I think I have to install if I'm being upfront and honest with y'all. So we need to do apt qemu guest agent. Trying to think what else I would need to install. There can't be a whole lot of things really. So one of the cool things that I liked about using Ansible to manage my fleet previously is I have all my playbooks in my GitHub, not my GitLab. So that way I can take a look at my bootstrapper right here and see what programs we were using. So here are the things that I need to install. So we're going to apt install certbot, git htop tree. Let's see. I should probably also install Nano's installed, so it should be okay there. IO top. Let's see what else. I think that's basically everything. Yeah. So there's some other ancillary like setup stuff that I'll do. Like I will go ahead and install my Git. Like I'll create a token for my Git repo and install that into the user account here. We'll do Git credential manager and all that kind of stuff. We'll do my SSH keys, as I've mentioned. I'll install them in the template. We will do some configuration stuff. Like what's a good example? We'll set up my rules for how to allow SSH on like what ranges and such. I install NFS utilities, so that way I can mount the NFS shares on any of my servers. And I also install NeoFetch just because it's a really easy way to see at a glance a bunch of information. Otherwise, yeah, I think we're basically done. Time zone's already set, so we don't need to worry about that. Static host name is already set, so we don't need to worry about that. So yeah, I think we're pretty good. So one of the cool things that you can do with UFW, which is uncomplicated firewall, you can just kind of use plain language to configure it. I still prefer IP tables for some things, but UFW works in most cases. And if there's a particular setup that I need to manually go in and tweak, I'll turn off UFW and do everything in IP tables. But anyway, so what we'll do is we're already sudos. We don't have to worry about that. So we want to do UFW allow from 192.168.1.0/24. So that's any IP on my local IP range to any port 22 UFW status. UFW enable. So now if we check the status, so now we allow, so anything can come in and hit port 22 as long as it's coming from 192.168.1.0, which is cool. You can go in and you can do all kinds of other stuff too. Like you might want to do FTP, telnet, anything like that. Port 80 for HTTP traffic. I'm not going to do any of that on the template because, again, the template doesn't have any services running on it. It's just what we copy from. So we're just going to kind of get the baseline working, and then we go from there. Don't think we need to do anything else there. Oh, you know what? We probably want to add. We want to add a second rule I just thought about. So we want to do to any app Samba. Could not find a profile matching Samba. Okay, probably because I don't have Samba installed. I'm going to do Samba as well just because I might use an NFS share. I really would like to go back to using SMB. The only reason I'm not using SMB currently is because Final Cut Pro on the Mac won't open a project file if it's on SMB over the network. But I don't intend to edit over the network anymore. Not until I get a 10 gig upgrade and I can feasibly do that. So I think we might just switch back to SMB and just call it a day because it's just going to be easier. And plus with Samba, I can set up like Active Directory and do all kinds of other fun stuff too. So that'll be fun for user persistence and other cool activities you can do. There we go. Okay, so now Samba works. So UFW status. Awesome. Let's see. What else am I going to do? I don't think I need to do any other ports. I think we're good there. I think the firewall's good. We've installed all the programs that we need. I guess let's just run an auto remove just for giggles. Okay, and then dist upgrade. Oh, is it apt dist upgrade? Yeah, it is. Okay. So nothing new there. So yeah, I think we're good, guys. So we've got our template now. So here comes the fun part. So whenever we're ready to actually configure something, well, first off, what we should do is we should reboot just to make sure that it actually comes back up correctly. And when it comes back up correctly, I'm also going to adjust the resources on this so we can make sure that it actually works in the lower footprint. And then we will also, off camera, I will install my Git credentials and my SSH keys and all that stuff. And then I think we will be good to... We'll set up our first VM and show you how the cloning process works and like how all of that stuff works. And then that should be a good first video. Okay, so I've been doing some tweaks, trying to get it down to where I actually wanted it. It's kind of crazy, but because of the minimal install, I was able to get this VM down to booting with only 518 megabytes of RAM, which is really fun. Would I recommend running most VMs with this low memory? Not really. You're going to run into a lot of problems, especially with modern stuff. But, I mean, it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing like a DNS server or whatever, yeah, it's fine. Who cares? They run on Raspberry Pis, so who cares? Like, you're not going to run a database. I mean, I guess you probably could, but like, it'd have to be a very small database and like one user and like, anyway, point being is just, I just wanted to see if I could do it, and I could. So, we're cool. So, this is all set up, ready to go. Got all my keys installed. Got everything all set up. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to give you a fairly high level overview of like how the clone process actually works. So what we do is we basically right click here, clone, give it the ID of where you're wanting to go to. I'm just going to move this one to 998 because we're not going to keep it for anything. So you give the name, give it the VM ID just like you would if you were creating a new VM. Hit clone. It copies the disk and then... Ooh, does not copy the disk. I've never tried to clone one before while it's booted, so I just assumed that it would work. So, no big deal. We'll power it off real quick. 998, name testing, and you can specify where you want the disk to go. All right, we're going to specify RAID Mark 4. And there she goes. And look at that, it's actually working now. Amazing. This will take a few minutes, depending on how big your disks are, how much data is in them. You can check the overall usage of your node by going to the overall tab and going to summary, and then you can kind of see it over here on the node screen, or you can click on the actual node itself and go to summary and get just like more detailed graphs if you don't want just an overview. So we can see like I'm barely using any CPU, barely using any RAM, whatever. So it's all just disk IO basically that we're waiting for. And look at that, we're done. Okay, so then you just boot this thing up like we did any of the other VMs. So it starts, we get a console. It is a clone exactly in the state of how that other one is. So it's got the host name. So you'll want to change the host name and change the IP, which I can show you how to do. It's pretty straightforward, but the whole IP thing, it depends on your, I think we talked about this earlier, I believe. It just kind of depends on everything that you're doing. So so this one came up with the same IP. Interesting. Not supposed to do that. It's supposed to have a different MAC address. Is that actually the same MAC address? It's supposed to randomize that whenever it clones. That'd be really funny if it just randomly assigned the same IP. Template v2 cbc9. Bro, that actually just assigned the same IP, like completely by chance. Either that or I think I set the static. Didn't I set the static IP in the server? I didn't leave it a DHCP, did I? I think I'm now just realizing a mistake that I made during setup. I'm pretty sure that I set the IP to static. Boy. Yeah, I'm just now realizing a mistake that I made during setup. I'm pretty sure that I set the IP to static on the actual thing, which is not what I wanted to do. Fuck. That is super what I did. Alright, well, that's annoying. That's okay, though. Alright, so I'm probably going to edit out some of what just happened because I'm stupid. So here's what you do. So you want to be sudo. You go to edit your net plan. You just comment out the addresses line as well as the address that's there. DHCP4, set that to true, save and apply, and restart net plan, or apply net plan rather, and you're good to go. It just kind of works. If you want to instead just change the static IP and you want to do it on a server by server basis, you can leave the DHCP4 line out, or you can set this to false and then literally just change the IP to the IP you want it to have. Net plan apply, you'll have the new IP. We now have our new IP is 192.168.1.210. I can set that as a static route in my server or on my router, and we will then be able to start logging in on that new IP. So something else I like to do is I like to change the host name, sudo systemctl. No, I'm sorry, it's sudo hostname ctl hostname, and then testing 1, 2, 3, whatever you want the name of the server to be. So then you can log out and then log back in. There's our new host name. Woo! Okay, cool. And then at this point, I'll start customizing the server for whatever specific use case I need for the new VM. So if I'm setting up a new Ansible server, I start installing all that crap. If I'm setting up Plex, I'll install all that stuff, so on and so forth. And you kind of keep them separate. Eventually, whenever I get my Ansible server back up and running, I have a Bootstrap script that I'm working on that I'd like to actually start using. And the idea is so that way it's a script that you can run at any time on any of the servers, and it will kind of update all of them with what I consider the latest base quote-unquote image. So it'll make sure that all servers, so if in the future I like set up Zabbix or something for monitoring or Rundeck or something, I can go back to my playbook, go, okay, this is now what I need every server at a minimum to have, add them in there, run that playbook on all of the affected servers. It updates all of them, includes the new additional packages. So no harm, no foul. Any VM I spin up in the future will also get that update. No harm, no foul. Super easy. But just as like a brief kind of basic introduction to, hey, we're creating VMs and we're spinning them up. This is how it works. It's pretty straightforward. Now that we've done all the hard work of installing Proxmox and getting like our base image created, most of everything is going to flow very seamlessly from here on out. All you really got to do is, like I said, clone the VM, set your IP, set the host name, and then do the additional setup for whatever you need to do, and you're done. I think the first server that we might start working on, we'll probably do the Sampa server first, just because I'd like to get my file share up and running again. And then once I have that up and running again, we can do some other fun stuff, like we can do Plex, we can do the VPN server, we can do like all that other stuff. So, but yeah, that's where we're at. This is Proxmox. Welcome to the crash course of Proxmox. Over the next few weeks, we will be using what information we learned here to start spinning up new servers, and we'll go through quite a bit. I had about 20 servers in my last fleet, so we'll probably go through the same stuff here and get it all up and running. But yeah, with all that said, guys, thank you for hanging out. Leave comments down below if you have some questions, or if you want to try things and want to tell me about how it's going for you, feel free. And with all that said, guys, I hope you have a good rest of your day.